Okay, and we are live. Welcome to another live broadcast of the Nursing Home Podcast, the only podcast that you need to listen to learn everything that there is about the world of nursing homes and what really goes on in the nursing home space. And we like to bring on professionals in the industry who can help educate all of us a little bit about this fascinating and greatly misunderstood space. So today, I have the unique privilege of bringing on the senior director at the Greenhouse Project, Susan Ryan. And Susan, before we even jump into the Greenhouse Project and the problem that it solves and all that, can you let our listeners know a little bit about who you are and why does this mean something to you?
Absolutely. Well, I have been in this nursing home space for a very long time. I happen to be a nurse, and I would say I had what I've called my call to action moment when I was the director of nursing in a nursing home. And it was at a time where best practices were we tied people up to keep them from falling. And I
Ouch.
knew in my heart that that didn't seem right. It didn't seem like it should be best practice, but yet that's what we were rewarded or incentivized in doing. So no wonder that I went into, when there was an opportunity, I went into home care. And it was a grant funded opportunity to prevent institutionalization of the elderly. And so I jumped at the opportunity to create programs and services, health screening, all sorts of things to keep people out of those dreadful places called nursing homes. And that was kind of my lens for many years, and I endeavored for years to, I always say I was home and community based before that was cool to be HCBS. But here's what I learned: as wonderful as home care is, that it really became cost prohibitive or socially isolating for many people within their homes. And by this time, culture change was happening in nursing homes. And I thought, we've got to have dignified spaces where elders can live some life with self determination, and that the workforce can really be an empowered workforce and really be in those relationships with elders. And so I went into a life plan community, and my goal was just to do everything I could to bring reformation and to kind of hitch our wagons to whatever was going to make these environments better. Heard about the Greenhouse Project in 2005. We
Mhm.
went to Tupelo, Mississippi to see where the first 4 greenhouse homes happened. And I'd say my world kind of came together, where home care and long term care came together just beautifully when I saw those 4 greenhouse homes. I joined the team, the Greenhouse Project team, in 2008, and I have been a part of this initiative ever since. And I tell you, I become more passionate about the work that we do each day.
Wow. Wow. Outstanding. Outstanding. So, first of all, thank you for that very full background of who you are and why this means so much to you. And I know we chatted before, and I definitely can relate on so many different levels to a lot of things that you said. First of all, I just want to apologize to the viewers for my horrible lighting, just as an aside. I'll just get that out of the way. But let's discuss the problem that the greenhouse project is addressing. So, how about it in your words? I know I have my experience as being a nursing home administrator in multiple centers, at least in Massachusetts, and I've gotten to see what it's like to receive the care in the nursing home space, and a lot of the challenges that are involved at no fault necessarily of operators or we're not talking about bad people here. These are all good people who are trying to do their best,
That's
but we're
right.
talking about systemic challenges. What do you see as the biggest problem, other than the specific case that you mentioned earlier? But what is the overall systemic problem that the Greenhouse Project is addressing?
I think a lot of times we bring institutional thinking, we bring ageist stereotypes into the conversation. And I will also say that, trying to gain efficiencies, economies of scale, when we put our focus there, and not on the elder or the staff that are supporting them, that can be a problem. When you prioritize people, when you prioritize the elders and the staff, you can gain some efficiencies there. So I use the three words to kind of think about it. It's about deinstitutionalizing, not just the environment. That's the physical spaces that we see. And that's important to create more home-like environments, or real home is what we call it. But
Hmm.
it's also our thinking and how we see the people that are living in those homes. Do we see them as declining and less than, or do we see them as people that have intrinsic worth? And then finally, the workers that support them. So deinstitutionalization of our environment and our thinking, destigmatization. And you think about all the stigmas associated with the people who are living in nursing homes, especially if they have a diagnosis of dementia, the devaluation and the stigma that goes alongside of that person, it's just has an impact on who they are and how they're treated. And there's research that would support that. So deinstitutionalize, destigmatize, and last but not least is humanized care. And I think since I've been in this space for over 40 years, I can tell you that when I first went into it, it was kind of, what did they want? What did they need? As if their needs were very different from my own needs. And as I've been in this space longer and longer, I've come to realize that we are humans. And at the core of our being, some of the things that I need today, I needed 20 years ago, and I will need 20 years from now, are the same things. And, we want dignity, we want self-determination, we want some control over how we live our life. Don't see me by my diagnosis first, but see me as a person.
Wow. Wow. So yeah, so this is something that which is so true, and I know just by you coming and saying it out the way it is, um, may feel offensive to some people. You're not saying it in an offensive way at all, but maybe the way I'm going to say it will be. But the point is that unfortunately, this does happen. Even the very people that are actually caring for the seniors, by being exposed to them, living and caring for them in listen, I thank God I have children to compare this to, but caring for them in a very intimate way, if you will, it can make them feel, a little bit of less than. These are human beings who cannot care for their own needs, who cannot control their bodily functions. Sometimes their minds may not be what they used to be. So now it's okay, their needs versus our needs. We're the people and they are the patients, and that's why people want to call them residents, and versus patients and all that. But there definitely is a subconscious, unintentional, hopefully, this type of definition which creeps in. Add to it the fact that the physical space lends itself to that type of environment, because you have this long hallway where people sitting out there. It used to be all the wheelchairs by the nurses station, and someone has, you said, tying people up. We officially don't do that anymore, but that used to be
Thank
normal,
God.
right? But when you're treating people in such a way and greatly understaffed many times, and again, there are systemic issues, and there are other podcast episodes that you can listen to where we discuss some of those challenges and some of those solutions. But being as it is, all that lends itself to trying to get by and trying to care. These are some of the most amazing individuals in the world who work but at the same time get desensitized to the fact that this could be us a few years down the road. This is not a them, and all of that leads to other challenges in institutionalized care. There can be more, and like you said, there's support this, but you're talking about negative clinical outcomes. You can talk about even just employee relationships with each other. What type of environment are we working in? Are we working in somebody's home? It's different than when you're working in an institutionalized setting. And I'll tell you one particular story that I've seen firsthand. I think even once, but for sure, I remember one specific incident where we did a renovation on the lobby area, and it needed a lot of TLC. You know, I'm not saying there's a whole separate conversation about renovations. Maybe one day we'll bring on something to talk about that, on if that makes sense and whose benefit is that really for? Is it for the residents? Is this just market? But the point is, the moment the renovations were done, you were able to see a physical difference in the demeanor of the staff, the way they went about. You're not loud shouting in the hallways. You're not going to be aggressive. You're not going to use maybe certain words that you would otherwise use when you're in an environment that doesn't allow that. A big upscale hotel, you may act differently than when you're in some dungeon, bar at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's just it's a different. We are all influenced by our surroundings, and this makes a huge difference. So obviously, when you're in an institutionalized type of setting and you have the gray paint and you have the long hallways and you have the residents sitting there and they're dressed a certain way, acting a certain way, it's going to lend itself to a certain type of care and a certain type of attitude, which again, unintentional, but this is something that definitely seeps through. So tell us a little bit. I think the problem we're familiar with. So what is the greenhouse project? What exactly does it look like, and how does it address these issues?
Well, you really said a lot right there that let me try to unpack a bit. And I'll
Sure.
start with kind of what you just talked about, and that is the role of the environment to kind of influence our behaviors or how we show up and what we do, and whether
Hmm.
it's staff or whether it's the elders or residents that are in those environments. And oftentimes, well, let me start with describing a greenhouse home. You walk in, we're talking small. We are talking 10 or 12 private rooms, and you walk in and it really looks like it could be your house, your home. And each private room has its own private bath. So when you think about dignity and care and bathing somebody, you've got a shower right there in that person's room. The amount of privacy and dignity by virtue of its environment is pretty powerful. In addition to that, you've got decentralized kitchens, laundry, housekeeping is decentralized. So you've got an open kitchen right there. So that means 24/7 access to food and really meeting the residents' needs and being able to get them what they want. So that
Let me
environment,
jump in there for 1 second.
sure,
You just said
absolutely.
something that is so simple, but something so overlooked. At home, if we didn't have access to the fridge for like 20 minutes, we'd go crazy. But yet
Exactly.
we have our seniors who live here many times for years and years. If they want a slice of bread, they're at the mercy of an overworked CNA to go bring them bread if they can't get it. We're talking about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at 11 p.m. is a challenge. So, okay, keep on going.
Exactly.
But that's just such an important point that we forget.
Right. Well, those are the systems that are really prohibitive. It's the system, but it's also the environmental structures that are prohibitive in really being able to do what that CNA would have on his or her heart to do and would naturally do if the environment and the systems were to allow that to happen. Access to outside, I think, is another really powerful opportunity within greenhouse homes. Um, Residents are able to go outside to a secured courtyard in the back. If it's a multi-story building, they have screened-in porches that are off kind of the dining area where they can get outside, feel fresh air, feel some sunshine on their face, and that feels pretty good. That's pretty normalizing to one's routine. And it's not that an elder resident would say, I want to go outside. Well, I can't take you right now. But that ability to be able to go out rather effortlessly, or more effortlessly than it would be in a traditional building. So the environment is powerful, and really being able to create spaces that are conducive to living lives and supporting the workforce to really being able to engender the meaningful life that they would like to do for the residents that live there. Something else
Wow.
you said, though, when you were talking about the intimate task that a CNA would be doing for an elder, and the reality that certainly there are some abilities that have been lost in the process of
Right.
aging and so forth. That's one reason they're there. But one of the things that we believe is really important is let's focus on retained abilities and let's really identify what each person is capable of doing. And for each person, it would be highly unique, but we want to make sure that each person is engaged in life and not just known by their care needs, but really what will it take
Or
for this,
worse, waiting.
right? And just really making sure that each person has that opportunity to live life on his or her own terms, and really understanding even when there's cognitive impairment, even when there are physical mobility issues, there are still retained abilities, and we want to know what those are for each person so that we can ensure they are able not just to receive care but to give back and to have purposeful living.
Got it. So I have a million questions here, but let's start with this. First of all, can you give a few examples, or maybe a couple of examples, of some of these retained abilities that you maybe allow them to express and continue?
Sure, we had, I'll give you a story. A woman had moved
Take a
into
story.
pardon me?
I said, we'll always take a story.
Oh, good. I love stories, and I think Greenhouse is best told by stories. But this was an elder that moved in actually on hospice to a greenhouse home in
Hmm.
Michigan. And through those deep knowing relationships, consistent staffing is another thing where you're able to build a relationship with each of the people in that home. Well, this caregiver recognized that this person had grown up in Iowa on a farm and that this woman had loved gardening. And so they suggested that they go out to the courtyard where they had some raised flower beds. And long story short, before long, this woman saw some flowers that needed to be deadheaded. And before long, she was no longer in her wheelchair, but pulling herself up to kind of grab hold of the heads of the flowers that needed to be pruned and taken care of. You would have defined her by her losses when she moved in, and they were plentiful. In fact, given less than 6 months to live. The other thing, and she did have cognitive impairment,
Hmm.
um, there was a dog in the house, and she really loved the dog. And she'd want to get outside and be with the dog, work on the plants. Long story short, she lived another 3 years,
Wow.
really experiencing a quality of life that had not been previously envisioned when she moved in. And if we had only looked at all her problems and the list of things that she couldn't do or couldn't participate in, if we didn't zero in on who she is and what would be important to her, we would have missed some really important opportunities for her to engage in a meaningful life.
Wow. Wow. That's an outstanding story, and it kind of this is the underlying component of all the care that we give in this space, and that is by seeing this, seeing people for who they are, not for what they can no longer do, is a complete game changer. I'm recalling now that at a point I wanted the activity aids in our regular nursing home, meaning not non greenhouse nursing home, to have a conversation with our residents and get to know them, write a few things about them. Came from this place, worked for 60 years as X, family situation is this, likes whatever, likes animals, likes, like you said, gardening, likes other things. And these simple things, even from a care standpoint, when someone's being combative, and unfortunately, as we know happens, someone's throwing their dinner across the room. Yeah, so like you said, there are losses and there are things, but there's an again, comparing it to children, it's the same thing, right? There's usually an underlying their reaction, maybe the way that they're reacting and the inability to effectively communicate is where the losses come in. But there's a human being in there that is expressing disapproval, displeasure, pain, concern, frustration. It's not random usually, And if we can know who they are better, if we can take a quick look at an index card that's right there, there might be HIPAA problems with that, but whatever it is. But if someone can look at their chart on the computer or whatever, or know them, even better, right? Consistent staffing, actually know who this person is. Like, oh, it's 2 a.m. and this is when she always would wake up for the last 30 years, and her job as, what do you know, a nurse in a nursing home or whatever it was, right? And then you have a way to do it. So now what do? We bring her to the nurse's station, and maybe even bring her behind the nurse's station and give her some papers to ruffle through, because that's what we would do. And it makes her feel alive. And then watch her calm down magically, and then bring her back to bed. Or maybe even something a little bit more productive, something depending on obviously the skill level. But I wanted to go back to a different point that you mentioned. I'm just looking at a comment that's coming. We'll get to that also if we have time. You mentioned about going outside. I just to make this a little bit more relatable, right? Everyone right now, unfortunately, another surge in COVID all over the world, including in the United States, including Boston, I assume, including where you guys, I don't even know where you are, but where you are as well.
I'm in Maryland, and we're going up to.
Oh, so you're in Maryland, right? I think you mentioned that last time. So when we were inside, let's say, and everyone's quarantined or inside or doing things differently than a year ago, right? Life is not the same. And we feel stressed, and there's anxiety and all sorts of fallouts. There's also some mental health issues. There's also challenges and frustrations that are being expressed in different ways because we cannot go to the restaurants like we used to going to. Our shopping is different, and we can't spend as much time outside. Now, imagine living every single day without the ability to get a sandwich, without the ability to go to the bathroom, without the ability to walk outside, get fresh air, without the ability to make a phone call, without the ability to get out of bed, without permission, plus outside assistance. And not for a few days, and not where you could bend the rule, but is looking maybe, and or make your own decisions. This is indefinitely, and it's becoming more and more restrictive, and that it's a one-way street. What does that do to a person? So, and add to that, putting somebody in an institutionalized setting. And again, I'm not anti-nursing homes. It's a very, very necessary place for a lot of people, but we're having a conversation about doing it even better. So putting someone like that in an institutionalized setting adds to all of this. Yes, now they're going to be safe, and now they're going to be cared for, and their underlying physical challenges are going to be dealt with, and they have care plans and all the stuff that good DONs know how to do, and administrators take the credit for. All that stuff is going to happen. But imagine if they can have a little bit of independence, and like you said, it can stress the areas where they can actually where they thrive, and the skill abilities that they are still retaining. That's a game. That's a whole different environment. So that's what makes this concept so exciting to me. Which brings directly to my next question, which I'm scared to hear what the answer is. Which is, this sounds amazing, and if you speak to operators, which I do in my line of business, they'll tell you this is great, this is wonderful, this is what we all want. How is this financially feasible? Private rooms, consistent staffing, private bathrooms, obviously. And by the way, that's something we didn't touch on also. When you take a regular person, you go into a hospital, and within minutes you're wearing a gown, exposed in ways that you're not used to be, and people are prodding and touching you all over your body, and everybody's checking you out, which we understand that it's necessary, but that's not a comfortable situation to be in. You lose some of your humanity and your dignity when that happens. So that's another thing that's restored with this. But how does it work financially, and what are the limitations?
So there are 4 things that I tell people to think about when you're trying to make this work. It can work. It does work. Here's what you need to think about. Controlling your development cost. Size matters, so keeping the square footage of each home down will be important. Really making sure, and there are so many different designs. And when we look at how much does it cost per square foot to build a greenhouse home, it varies. It from state to state. Where you're building, do you have the land, and what do you have? So development costs, how you're funding or financing. And there are some that have gotten USDA financing at really good terms. We've had tax exempt bonds for many of our nonprofit providers that have done this. Conventional banks have given some really good rates and good terms. I'm hoping that we're going to, throughout this crisis, that I'd love to see us get incentives from a financing perspective that would incentivize what we know has worked well during the COVID crisis. And so we'll see about that. So development, funding, financing, your payer mix, and really looking at your revenue and thinking about what mix of Medicaid, private funds, and Medicare can you put together to achieve the financial viability? And, depending on the state that you're in and what the Medicaid reimbursement rate would be, some states will obviously make it easier than other states to make that work. We've got some greenhouse communities that are over 60%, probably 70% Medicaid. They're in a state where the Medicaid rate is a decent reimbursement rate. One state has a $10 a day bump in Medicaid reimbursement rates if you are doing a small house type model. I want to see more states offer that type of incentive. And last but not least is really controlling your operating cost and looking at it from a staffing perspective and really thinking about, sometimes we call it flattening the hierarchy and really making sure that from a direct care staff perspective, we have ample staffing for the care partner to resident ratio. We want to make sure the nurses that are administering the meds and really, making rounds and seeing the residents, we want to make sure that staffing is ample. But oftentimes we've got layers and layers of people that we think we need, administrative folks, middle management leaders. And so we want to make sure that we're really watching our staffing model. We believe you can control food costs when you know who likes what to eat. You're not cooking oatmeal for everybody. You're cooking oatmeal because this person and this person likes it, not all 10 or 12. And those are some of the things that will make it work. We use a universal worker model. So that person that is doing care is also doing the cooking, and the cleaning, the laundry, and those sorts of things. So again, ample staffing there. But in context of COVID and infection control, I have fewer people coming and going. I don't have dietary staff and housekeeping staff and laundry staff coming in and out. That's all comprised in that direct care worker role.
Wow, that's quite a complete answer. That I'm very happy to hear. Okay, let me try to process this for my brain and for maybe those who are listening. Obviously, building anything is expensive, right? Making any structural changes is expensive and challenging. And taking an existing structure and creating a greenhouse type of environment is going to be a challenge, and sometimes may not be possible. When you're building something new, on the other hand, it's definitely more feasible. And again, I'm not saying that it's not feasible to do it to an existing structure, but from a financial standpoint, by a few things you said. First of all, this is a recognized better way of giving care. And my humble opinion is this is the light bulb that was going on a few minutes ago, is that the more we can push and prove and shout from the rooftops that this is how care should be delivered, the more we can have government agencies recognizing this, and Department of Public Health recognizing this, CMS recognizing this, and that this works, and that ultimately this will be financially better for them as well. There'll be less people going out to the hospital, less falls, there'll be less negative clinical outcomes translate into more expense on the payer, whoever the payer is, right?
Exactly.
So the more, like you said, and there's a state that has a $10 a day bump in reimbursement because they realize this and they realize how important it is and they want to encourage this. So I think that to make this widely accepted, it would have to, I don't think, I wonder if it'll ever be mandated that you have to deliver this type of care. I doubt that will happen, but at least to be, maybe it will, I would love to see that happen, but maybe at the very least to be incentivized from everyone, from the banks, and maybe they have their own incentives for doing this, financial incentives, from the government agencies, from the public health departments, and every on the city, state, and even on a national level, in order to promote this. But even before that happens, there are ways of making this. It's more feasible than people might think, because everyone says, yeah, of course, if I could afford one. Oh, one second. One other point is what you said before. You're combining the staffing, so your CNA is also a housekeeper, is also a diet aide. First of all, that helps also break the mold.
Yes.
Besides for financially making sense, dollars and cents. Again, you may need, instead of two aides and two housekeeping staff, one and a half diet aides, or however we say it, you might need 4 people instead of 6, or whatever the numbers are. I'm sure you know the numbers better than me, but I'm just saying from the earlier part of the conversation, you're changing the model. I'm not someone who works on the mill tray, on the line in the kitchen. I'm not someone who brings carts up to the unit and then says lunch is here and runs away. And then if the CNA was busy with a crisis, that lunch will sit there for 25 minutes and then delivered cold to the
Exactly.
residents. This is, I know I'm working with Betsy for the last 2 years. I know what she likes. I know what she doesn't like. When it comes lunchtime, which today might make sense to be at 12:30, even though yesterday was 12 o'clock. I don't know if that's how practical, but the point is, I'm going to make her food that she likes, and I'm going to serve it to her and clean up after her, and then care for her and be with her, throughout my whole shift. And that's a whole different type of way of relating. If my whole relationship is room to room and working with the residents, getting them out of bed, cleaning them, bathing them, dressing them, but I'm doing this for everybody equally all day, and unfortunately maybe don't have the sufficient help that I need, that helps create that type of mindset. But if I'm actually living almost like with a parent or with multiple grandparents at the same time, and I'm looking after these 2, 3, 4 residents, and after all their needs, that anything that's that I can't do, as opposed to I'm not a nurse or a doctor, that definitely can help break this model. I'm looking at the time, but we could talk about this all day, because
Yes, it could.
really, because this is such a necessary change, and I'm hoping that it's really going to happen. I really, really am. I hope it is happening already, but I hope it's going to even grow from here. But let's talk, and I mentioned briefly, how did these facilities that are operating in this type of model, how did they fare during COVID?
I think that's the most beautiful thing. I think as a nurse, I always thought that this was the best model to mitigate or for infection control. So for cold and flu seasons and that sort of thing, it's not like we haven't dealt with infections and viruses and so forth and so on. Having all private rooms. I mean, there's just so many things about this model that would say this would be a model that I would assume would do well during COVID. And in fact, our homes did incredibly well. We've been capturing data, and our mortality rate and confirmed cases of COVID have been significantly less than the traditional counterparts. And we're working with a research analyst at University of North Carolina, and we're hoping to really unpack that data to really compare a greenhouse home data with a traditional home that's in the same geographical area. So we're really looking, because community spread has been certainly connected with an increase of cases in that nursing home. So how did greenhouse do in that same neighborhood, if you will, that same community? And so we will be unpacking that. We hope to get a paper published, but just to tell you off the top that they have fared really well, and significantly less cases and significantly less on the mortality side. And that does my heart so good.
Yeah, so we can tell that you're definitely in the right place here. We know there's one facility, and there may have been others, but that I saw, I think it was in France, that they in March and April, they made a rule that no one leaves or comes. Right? Maybe we spoke about this already. I don't remember. That's my dementia. Let's focus on the party that don't have dementia. But the point is that they said absolutely nobody walks out from this place. No one goes in, not administrators, not nurses, not CNAs, not doctors. And, obviously, and they had, I think, 0 cases until whatever point they felt it was free to go out. That's not the case in a greenhouse facility, but it's much closer to that than a typical facility where you have just so many more people. So you have the number of employees is much greater, and therefore you have the number of people coming and going, but also shared staff. So in the same shared room, shared spaces, just having much less privacy. Just if you don't mind, I'm just looking at Stephanie Erickson left a couple of comments that I just want to put on the screen for a second and read them. So Stephanie says that love the discussion. We do not disappear as we get older. We still need the basics, such as peanut butter and jelly sandwiches when we want, having privacy during a shower, getting fresh air daily. You also need more than just the basics, but these examples really highlight how we take these things for granted when we institutionalize people. And
I love that,
really
Stephanie. True. That's really well said.
Yes, it definitely is. And this is really what we were discussing. I didn't read this yet, but we'll read it now. Great idea to create a conversation tool for staff to use. To get to know people. This is what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes staff won't initiate this on their own. This is a great way to build connections so that they can see their resident as a unique individual with a life of experiences. As an administrator, sometimes I didn't have anything to do, so that's a joke. But I would go sometimes to the rooms and really meet with some of the residents to get to know them. And it's fascinating. I mean, the of today, unfortunately, many of them will be nursing home residents tomorrow. I had one particular resident, don't know where he's up to these days, who was a hospital administrator, and I was able to talk business with him. He was going through, obviously had a lot of challenges and was where he was for a reason, but I was able to talk to him about his hospital administrator days and some of the challenges he dealt with, and try to learn from his experiences to my nursing home administrator days. And even if his advice was not on point, and even if what he says was no longer relevant, just the fact that we're able to relate on that patient, it obviously changes my perception of who he is, but more importantly, it changes his perception of who he is. And the truth is, his points are on point, what he said. And what he said is relevant. And his experience, he did have quite a variation of, very interesting experiences, which did play on some of the things that we were dealing with. Not everything changes. So yeah, this is really just a fascinating conversation. I just see that we went so late, so we're gonna have to wrap things up here. So Susan, before we let you go, any final thoughts you would like to share with our listeners or our viewers right now about the Greenhouse Project before we tell them where to go to learn more about this?
Sure. I guess the only thing that I would say is that it really starts with each one of us and really taking a look at our own beliefs and perceptions, our own mindset about, and Stephanie kind of alluded to that, is how we see people needing long-term care, how we see elders, and do we see them as less than or not capable of doing some of the same things that would be normal things for us to do. And while some of their abilities have changed, they're still people, and to just fundamentally just see them as a person with intrinsic worth. And I think when we take a look at our beliefs, that will influence our behaviors. I always say words are the fruit of our thoughts. And so as we change our mindset and start speaking things that are more positive and really framing their retained abilities, that helps to inform our behaviors. And then you kind of alluded to it, even the tool that you developed. What is the system that will support the change, and how can we create systems and infrastructure to support some of those things to kind of make life better?
Amazing. Thank you, Susan, so much for coming on to the Nursing Home Podcast. If our listeners want more about the Greenhouse Project, about some of the work that you guys are doing, where's the best place to send them?
Well, we have a website, thegreenhouseproject.org, and we also do a podcast as well. It's called Elevate Elder Care. And, we talk about some of these same issues, and kind of to your point, what can we do to really seize this moment in time to really affect change and to say incentives matter. And I think this is the time where we need to start incentivizing the things that we know work. And it's really doing the right thing for elders and those that support them.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. So head on over to thegreenhouseproject.org or check out the Elevate podcast. Is that what it's called again?
Elevate Elder Care.
Elevate Elder Care podcast. Okay, I'll put all the links in the show notes to these resources to learn more about the work that Susan and the Greenhouse Project are doing, and to see if that makes sense for your center, or just to understand, some of these ideas that we spoke about a little bit more in depth. And as always, you can head on over to the nursingHomePodcast.com and to check out this episode and all the past episodes of the Nursing Home Podcast. So thank you, Susan, so much for coming on the podcast. It was really an honor to have you.